probably now more than ever, this is felt in our world, in our society. But it is dangerous business leaving your front door, isn't it? Right? I mean, it is, there's tensions, there's threat out in the world, right? And so we think about leaving our front door and the challenge that can be. But I like what J.R.R. Tolkien said to Frodo. Lord of the Rings for all you nerds. I'm just kidding. Here's the quote. This is Tolkien, Lord of the Rings. It is a dangerous business, Frodo, going out your door. You step onto the road, and if you don't keep your feet, there's no knowing where you might be swept off to. And there's something about when you read something like that line from Lord of the Rings, maybe something raises up in you, where you say, yeah, adventure, sign me up, the great wild, right? I'm going to go out there and the world's my oyster and I'm going to get mine and we're going to, do the adventure. Right? There's something that builds up in you. You hear that, you're like, yeah, I don't know, the world is dangerous, but let me at it, right? We think that, and then reality sets in and we are addicts for certainty. Aren't we? Like the idea of spontaneity, the idea of adventure, it sounds great. It might make good for a hashtag on our social medias, but it is a very terrifying reality to actually go and pursue. Because of the certainty we feel. I mean, we live our lives by GPS, and more than just our cars, but that's one way. Right? We want the step-by-step direction and the turn and, maybe not too frequently, but enough where I'm not missing my turns, right? And we want that. We will not go and visit a new restaurant until we have looked up their reviews and we've gone to their website and we're like, what am I getting myself into? Has anybody commented on the nachos and how good they are? Just me? Okay. But we check out reviews. We track our packages, right? Amazon people, right? It's coming in 2 days. And yet in that 48-hour window, you're like, is it here yet? Track my delivery, track my package. DoorDash. That's even less time. Like, you're probably getting it in less than an hour, and yet you're watching where your dasher is at. And then your pizza person, I mean, you name it, we are addicted to certainty. I want to know where it is. I want to know how it's coming. I want to know when. And we want certainty. And so the idea of adventure, this idea of calling, while it may sound exciting, it bucks up against reality. And we're actually saying, oh, no, we're far more into certainty than we are to adventure. And I think about, that little GPS you have on your phone or maybe on your console, right? What if it just said, hey, I'm going to take you somewhere, but I just need you to go out. I'm not going to tell you where we're going, but if you go out, then I'll tell you eventually where you're going to end up. Some of us would say, hey, what is wrong with this thing? I'm calling up GM and I'm saying, I know Cody Hansen and I want to know, why is this thing broken? Right? We would say, hey, this is something abnormal. This isn't something normal. This isn't something I would do. And yet, what if it was God that said, hey, I'm going to call you to go somewhere. I'm not going to tell you where you're going, but I just need you to go, and then I'll figure it all out later. I'll tell you all about it later. But there's an inheritance waiting for you, but you just need to go. And I wonder how many of us would come with our apprehensions, with our questions, with our doubts, with our fears, and say, okay, Lord, you're asking something of me that I don't necessarily want to do. And so God makes this call to Abraham here. And faith, what it's going to do is it's going to challenge. Faith is going to challenge our need for certainty. It was going to challenge Abraham's need for certainty. And you're going to call, in times you'll be called to go without knowing where you're going. And sometimes that calling is a forced calling, right? God makes it happen. And you don't know, okay, that door just got closed on me, or that circumstance changed, or this thing, and maybe I didn't choose it or want it, but okay, Lord, where is it that you are leading me? And that time of waiting, that time of questioning is so difficult because it bucks up on what we want, and what we want is to know the answers. We don't like surprises. Most of us don't like surprises. And yet, by definition, faith is dealing with things unseen and circumstances yet to be experienced. Right? I mean, Hebrews 11:1. It is the confidence of what we are hoping for, but it is the evidence of things not seen. Mark Twain jokingly said, and you're going to see his jadedness, but he said, faith is believing what you know ain't so. Right? That's how a lot of people view faith. Like, it's crazy. Like, do I actually believe that there's something out there? And sometimes when God calls and when God's directing, it's like, whoa, am I off the map now? Because I wouldn't have chose this circumstance. I wouldn't have asked to be led here. And from everybody else's vantage point, it can feel like what I just did was crazy. Maybe it was leaving a job, maybe it was going into a job, or maybe it was a relationship, or whatever it is. People are going to have judgments, and you say, hey, man, unless, like, this has to be God, or otherwise this is totally foolish. Because it doesn't make sense to my senses. And so we're going to pick up here with Abraham in Hebrews chapter 11. We have this far dealt with Abel, Enoch, and Noah. And now we get introduced to Abraham in this hall of faith, who is the prototype of being called to go without a roadmap. Without a roadmap, he is called to go, and the text emphasizes that. But let's look at our text once more. In verse 8. It was by faith that Abraham obeyed when God called him to leave and go to another land that God would give him as his inheritance. Now let's unpack this for a moment. The author holds up Abraham's pioneering faith. The author holds it up, and then he caveats and says, did you see that part? He went without knowing where he was going. Anybody signing up for that adventure? He goes without knowing where he was going. Abraham's journey begins in Genesis chapter 12. That's where the story starts. And at this time, Abraham would have been a native of Ur, the city Ur, U-R. But at this point, at this stage of his life, he's 75 years old, and he's living in Haran. 75, he's pretty settled. Like, at 75, your life is pretty figured out. And at this stage, both Ur and Haran, relatively affluent areas. Like, Abraham is a guy that is living comfortably. You know, I mean, yes, God is yet to bless them with kids, and though that's going to be a promise that God's going to give him, you know, he's getting old. He's going to need help. He's going to need family around him. And God comes and God calls. And he says, hey, I'm calling you to a land, and I need you to go there. I'm not going to tell you which one it is, but just start going, and I'll get you there. That sounds like a radical call for a 75-year-old to hear. What do you mean? Like this is so out of left field. Like, at this stage, I've already made so many plans. I've already set up so many things right here in Haran. In Genesis 12:1, leave your native country, your relatives, and your father's family, and go to the land I will show you. Now, imagine that. He said, literally everything that you have ever known. He says, forget about it. Leave it. Man, you'd feel vulnerable, you'd feel exposed, you'd feel like all the insecurities would start rising up. Like, Mom and Dad? I'm leaving Mom and Dad? I'm leaving my brothers and my sisters, and I'm leaving, you know, our little world? Man, we've got money here. You're telling me to leave the cattle? You're telling me to leave the things that I'm trusting in to set up for my future? Like, God, this is a crazy call. This is essentially what God says to him. He says, Abraham, I know you've worked. I know you've set up for yourself. He says, I know you have a 401k. You have a retirement plan right here in Haran if you stay. And he says to the retiree, he says, forget your retirement plan. Throw it out the door. Hey, we got some seniors here, right? Our stars group, whom I love. But imagine God coming to you and saying, hey, you're in retirement now. The plans you made for 75 years. He said, yeah, that's not my plan. And I need you to leave that plan. I want us to feel the audacity and the weight of this call. How much God is asking of Abraham in this moment. He's asking him to remove every comfort and everything that he could possibly imagine putting his trust in. And God is saying, no, you need to trust me. And Abraham obeys. Again, with the emphasis in verse 8, that he obeys without knowing where he was going. I think about that part, that without knowing where he was going and the absurdity of that. Like, this is in a time where you don't have atlases and travel blogs. Right? Where? Let me look that up. Him and Sarah are not laying in bed on their laptops saying Zillow in Canaan. Price range, like that's not what's happening. They're not, they have no semblance of what they're gonna walk into in terms of where they're gonna live, where they're gonna raise a family, because God's gonna promise that. He's promising kids. And so they're gonna have to think about all those things. And yet they can't vet that. They can't vet what the neighbors are like. They can't vet what home am I going to live in? What food am I going to eat? Like they can't vet any of that. And God is still calling them to this incredible call. And here's what we can know about Abraham, the fact that he obeys. Because look at that in verse 8. Look how closely those words are. By faith, Abraham obeyed. There's such a close connection, faith and obedience, that are linking together here. They're linked together by Abraham. That he has faith, and now he has to obey. And so, by faith, Abraham obeys. And what this tells me is that Abraham had less fear regarding his uncertainty than he had in confidence of his guide. Right? He doesn't have any certainty in the journey. I don't know where I'm going, but I know who's leading me. I know the one who's calling. I know the one who says here, and that's where I'm going. I can believe the here. Why would anybody do this? Why would anybody say yes to this call? Well, it's obvious from the text. It's by faith. The only way somebody does this is by faith. Otherwise, it's absurd to our natural senses. Doesn't make sense. And we talked about this kind of at the tail end of last week, but faith isn't this like warm, cozy, fuzzy blanket of certainty. It's not about certainty. Faith is not about certainty. If anything, it's a hindrance to faith. Certainty is a problem for faith. What faith is about is confidence. Confidence about things that are what they're hoped for, and the evidence of things not seen. Anne Lamott talks about this. That the real challenge of faith is not doubt, but it's certainty. Like if you have 100% certainty about something, you don't need faith. You don't need faith. Like that's logic. It's when there is doubts, in the face of doubts, to still trust. When there is uncertainty, to say, no, I know who is the one who has called me, and I will trust in him. Like faith, while it's also not certainty, it's also not blindly leaping into the abyss. Like Abraham had content. Like he had a promise to hold on to. Right? Genesis 12, verses 2 and 3, God says, I'm going to make you a great nation. He says, I'm going to, by your family, you're going to bless the whole world. Like, this is a promise that God is making to Abraham. All of the nations of the world will be blessed through your offspring, Abraham. So he knows that there's a promise that he's holding on to from God. And so it's not just blindfold, wishful, hopeful thinking. But he's saying, okay, this is where the Lord is leading. And as crazy as it sounds, I'm going because that's where it's the Lord. But he's not just throwing darts in the dark. And so his faith was a response to a promise. I love what Dr. Alton Trueblood says. He says, faith is not belief without proof, but trust without reservation. But trust without reservation. I love that. Like when it's like, okay, this is the Lord, then I can't hold on to anything. I can't, the Lord, if this is the Lord, then I can trust him. I can walk out. I can take the next step. Even if I don't know where it's going, even if I don't know where it leads to, I can trust because this is the Lord. It's not belief without proof, but it's trust without reservation. Now, verse 8, again, you see that parallel or that connection to faith and obedience. They're linked together because when you think about Abraham's faith to obey, he doesn't obey because he just likes a rush. He doesn't obey just because he likes the feeling of uncertainty. No, rather, he obeys because, again, he is resolute that this is where the Lord is calling him. Now, let's consider with our rational modern minds for a moment. Many of us believe that the opposite of faith is doubt. But again, as we looked at that quote, faith is not, the opposite of faith is not doubt, but it's certainty. And we rob ourselves of faith when we demand for our certainty. And so faith often is in the realm of not knowing fully and yet having to trust in God's reliability. Faith often is in the realm of not knowing fully yet trusting in God's reliability. Abraham had plenty of years to doubt these promises. Right? God was not going to fulfill the promise of offspring for another few decades after he calls him to leave Haran to go towards Canaan. I mean, you're almost looking, he's got all this time to doubt, to debate, to demand. But he doesn't doubt, debate, or demand. He obeys. Simply put, he obeys. Look at verse 9 with me for a moment. And even when he reached the land God had promised, he lived there by faith, for he was like a foreigner living in tents, and so did Isaac and Jacob, who inherited the same promise. So this was not a quick trip. Right? He spends the rest of his life in Canaan. This is where he beds down. And when he gets there, did you see what God gives him? When he arrives to the land, when he gets the promise, God doesn't throw him the keys to the city. He doesn't say, oh yeah, over yonder, over those rolling foothills and that little oasis of water. He goes, that big hill that big house on the hill, that's yours. He doesn't do that. Abraham lives in a tent the rest of his life. And he never owns an acreage. He never even owns an ounce of the land, other than a little burial plot for Sarah. But that feels weird when the promise was, hey, the land is yours. And when you get there and when you inhabit it, all you get is a tent and you don't even get any of the land. You are living as a foreigner in a world that's not home. Hence, strangers and exiles. I want to I had gotten a few raised eyebrows when I had told people we were going to call this series Strangers and Exiles, when it's always been called the Hall of Faith. And I want you to see over and over, these are people that are living by faith, yes, but they were strangers and exiles in a world that wasn't their home. And so here, Abraham living in a tent. I mean, I wonder if he would have known this was the house, how that might have, like, hey, can you at least provide an air mattress? Because I don't know about you guys, not a camper. Didn't grow up doing it. I'm not throwing shade on you if you like it. For some people, they like sleeping on the ground and bugs and suspicious noises at 2 a.m. Some people like that. Others like air conditioning and a mattress and Diet Coke in the fridge. Some of us like that, differently. But here, Abraham is called to tent living the rest of his life. This is a stranger in the land. And here he's going to have to trust. He's going to have to trust the promise that God had given him was real. Why would God do this? Why would God say, hey, I'm going to give you this land, you're going to get this blessing, you're going to get good, and then the next day he finds himself in a tent in a land that he doesn't own? I love this quote by A.W. Pink. He says, instead of a river, God often gives us a brook, which may be here today and dried up tomorrow. Why? To teach us not to rest in our blessings, but in the blesser himself. Like some of us, we just want blessing the rest of our lives, no interruptions, just a river that's always there, always flowing. Like, who wants that? You guys are liars. One person telling the truth. I mean, we would love just constant blessing, and it doesn't work that way. If it worked that way, we'd say, God, I don't need you. I've got my blessing. I've got my stuff. But we get to trust in the blesser, not the blessing. The creator, not the creation. To teach us not to rest in our blessings. I love that. But look what Abraham does. Why is he so faithful to this call of God on his life? Well, it's verse 10. He says, Abraham was confidently looking forward to a city with eternal foundations, a city designed and built by God. His eyes were beyond this earth. His eyes were beyond the circumstances of his life. And what's so interesting when you think about this is that as Abraham is journeying to wherever God's leading him to, he knows that the promised land wasn't geography. What does that verse say? Verse 10. He was awaiting a city not built by human hands, but with heavenly, eternal foundations. Right? His eyes are on the celestial city. His eyes are on the New Jerusalem. His eyes are on a city beyond this world. It wasn't like he got to Canaan and said, oh, thank God for the promise. He said, no, this is not home. This is not it. And so he was able to withstand the tent living. And Abraham doesn't live a perfect life. I mean, we know about his hiccups in Egypt, and we know that, he's not always trusting God, but he trusted God enough with the first step. Trusted God enough with the first step, and that first step lands him in the Hall of Faith. That he obeyed without even knowing where he was going. He took that first step towards Canaan. Ultimately, his destination he knew wasn't there. He knew it was something better and greater. But what does Abraham's journey say to our journey? That's what I want us to talk about for a few minutes. Let's step into Abraham's sandals, if you will. This week in my preparation, I was thinking about, I have different perspective now on texts and scripture, right? Life changes you, and your own experiences, you bring to the text, and you see things that maybe you didn't otherwise see. And so I am picturing the conversation that Abraham has to have with Sarah in a whole new way. Because it's like, okay, if God was laying something on my heart and I have to go home and I have to say, hey, Karen, guess what? God's calling. Oh, great. Where are we going? I don't know. Well, how are we going to get there? I'm not sure. Are we going to be taken care of? Can't tell you that. All I know is I'm confident that God is calling. And she's like, well, hold up a second, because do we even know what the schools are going to be like? Because in a few years, we're going to have to be thinking about that. What are the schools like in Canaan? Do they even have Starbucks? What am I going to do for my morning without Starbucks? Milk and honey, yes. It's there. Yeah, no Diet Coke in Canaan. I'm out. Sorry, Lord. You asked one too many things of me. But that is a real call that God gave him. But the challenge, that challenge is real, to sit down, because that's what I started thinking about. Sometimes God calls you to make a move, and sometimes God calls you to follow. And there's been times where God's called me to move in life, and when God's called you to take a move, and you take that first step, and you don't know if that bridge is going to hold you, it feels scary as all get out, doesn't it? That's a real fear, is taking that first step. When God's called you to move, when he's called you to an action, when he's called you to a new season, when he's called you to a new vocation, when he's called you to whatever is new, that first step is terrifying. But the call to follow. Like, you think about Sarah in this moment. God didn't tap Sarah and say, hey, guess what? I'm going to lead you to the land that I promised. And no, she is now having to follow the calling that was given to her husband, Abraham. And I think about how hard that would be. I got to say goodbye to my mom and dad because God's called us to go. And I mean, hey, they're 75. How well do you think their folks are doing? Realistically, right? Like, we as people make plans. Like, if one of our parents gets sick, if they start not doing well, you know, we might have to clear out some space in the attic and in the garage and say, hey, you got a place to stay here. Right? We think about our parents in their last days and stages of life, and we say, hey, how can I care for them? And here, God's call to Abraham is telling Sarah, you're not going to be around for mom and dad in their older years. You're not going to, and you think, again, I want you to see the magnitude of this calling, not just for Abraham, but also for Sarah. Because they're leaving a life that has been entirely built for 75 years. That they probably felt secure in, that they probably said, hey, these are the golden years. This is what you work a full career for, this moment right now. And Sarah, you got to follow. I just thought about the weight of that this week. The call for Abraham to move, deathly scary. The call for Sarah to follow, deathly scary. Both took tremendous faith. And the author of Hebrews is going to talk about Sarah trusting in the Lord in the next couple of verses about the fertility stuff. But man, I don't want to miss the point that Sarah had some tremendous faith following Abraham in that moment. And the difficulty is surrounding those conversations. They had to relinquish the control and hold on to the promise that God had given. Genesis 15, verse 5, God said to Abraham, he said, I am going to make you, the father of many nations. And he says, your offspring are going to outnumber the stars in the sky. And I just imagine him bedding down in that Middle Eastern desert, laying outside of his tent, looking up at that night sky, and there was that tangible promise regularly that he couldn't escape. Every time the night came, he's reminded that God had made a promise and that God is faithful and that he's good and that I can trust him. Even if I don't have the full story and even if I don't have all the details figured out, I can trust him. Some of you may be unsettled right now living in a tent. I don't know what your circumstances are necessarily, but maybe for you it's a health diagnosis you just feel unsettled with. Maybe it's a career change. Maybe it's relationships, or you know what it is. You know that feeling of being unsettled, and God is calling you to trust him. To trust him in this. Though you might not see, you might say, okay, God, I am trusting you. I have given you my yes. I'm at where maybe I don't even want to be, but because this is where you have me, this is where I am, and I am trying to trust you in this, but I can't see. That might be you. That might be you. Either where you say, I feel so unsettled, and that feeling of unsettledness is, I want to encourage you with this. You are not alone. All of Hebrews 11 is people that know that feeling of unsettled. Most of us in this room know that feeling of being unsettled. And it's what Lewis wrote in Mere Christianity. He says, if I find in myself a desire that nothing in this world can satisfy, then the only logical explanation is that I was made for another world. Like, when you feel that ache, when you feel that angst, when you look out at the world and you say, hey, this isn't normal, this isn't right, this isn't, welcome to realizing this world is not our home. And like Abraham, we have to fix our eyes on the celestial city, the city that's outside and beyond the sun. And that's where we place our hope. That's where we place our confidence. Now, what does this mean for Monday? What does this mean for Monday? I think a heart check. I think an honest assessment of our hearts. Because here's the thing about a call like this. Could you imagine what you would feel like in that moment? Getting a call like this, where it was clear God was calling you, leading you. I mean, you might feel excitement. Man, a journey. So, an adventure. But then you might feel sad, like think about them having to say goodbye to their folks, them saying goodbye to their world. There's a sadness of a loss that you might feel in a calling like this. There might be a feeling of being overwhelmed, like, what on earth did I just say yes to? Right, where it all begins to level in, right? Begin to assess your heart, because your feelings, faith is a mix of feelings, is it not? Faith can have you be excited, it can have you be sad, it can have you be overwhelmed, it can be all those things and still be faith. Doubts, uncertainty, all of that you can still have faith and be feeling those things. And so as you begin to check your heart, you begin asking, okay, Lord, where is an area of my life that you're asking for me to take a step into? Even if I don't have it all figured out, even if the plans don't always make sense. It might be befriending a coworker or a neighbor, and you have no idea where that friendship's gonna go. You don't know the challenges that might come. Hey, getting into a real relationship is difficult because things can go bad and they can go sour and they can be hard. You can get hurt. And so some of us fear friendships and relationships because of that. And maybe God's still calling you and saying, hey, you need to be that person. I've put you there with proximity for a reason. Maybe for you it's stepping into a new opportunity, where you're like, okay, this opportunity's been presented, I don't necessarily know, but maybe it's a job, maybe it's whatever, and you're saying, okay, I'm gonna step into it, and I might not have it all figured out, but I feel the Lord is leading in this. It might be stepping away from something. That, hey, I'm just too comfortable here, I'm too spiritually stagnant, and so I have to remove myself from a situation or a place because of this. Or maybe it's stepping away from an addiction, something you've held on to, that you felt hope in, and you put trust into, and it's time to let go and step away. It's anywhere you sense God saying, trust me here. Anywhere you sense God saying, trust me here, that's the invitation for the step. Again, I don't know all your circumstances or things you're walking through. By faith, Abraham considered God's word, and he obeyed, and he followed. But I think that had Abraham said, I can't move until I have the full plan, sometimes delayed obedience is an easy on-ramp to disobedience. Sometimes delayed obedience is an easy on-ramp to disobedience, where it's like, okay, I know I probably should. I know God is calling me, but man, it's just scary. And we walk away from it. But as we think about Abraham's call and what he hears and what he understands God saying, it just is that he obeys, like right away, like first step. It's the very next word. By faith, Abraham obeys. We don't delay in our obedience. We move into it because God's calling. I think if Abraham would have stepped back and said, I have to wait till the full picture is realized for me, then I think the verse could have read, by faith, Abraham considered what God was saying, considered what God was calling, and didn't eventually do it because he didn't have enough information. That's how the verse could read, if he just waited around for the bigger picture. And I don't know about you, but I know for me, I don't want to delay in the things that God calls me to. I don't want the verse to be said, Tyler Wickham considered the calling I gave him, but because he needed too much information, he didn't. I don't want that said about me, and I don't want that said about us as a church. I don't want that said for you. There's an old hymn, and I'm not old, but I know old hymns because I grew up Baptist. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus, but to what? All the Baptists came forward. I'm kidding. There's like no Baptists here, so that's great. I get myself in trouble all the time. There's a pastor friend of mine that became a mentor just a few years ago. But he would say this regularly in his church. And it's just a few words. Trust, obey, give your life away. Trust, obey, give your life away. That to me is the heart of the message. It's the heart of this series. Trust, obey, give your life away. Jesus said this. He says, you who desiring to save your life, he says, you'll lose it. Abraham, you want to stay in Haran? You want to live this comfortable life because, you planned this and you have this for yourself and you made these things and you're going to be comfortable there. And he goes, but I'm calling you to something different. I'm calling you to something better. But you can stay there. You can try and build your kingdom. You can try to build your empire. He says, but if you do, you'll lose the thing you're chasing. He says, but if you lose all of that and come after what I'm calling you to, you'll find what you're looking for. There's a real temptation for us in this world to claw after certainty and security. Right? I need to make sure that, I've got everything exactly positioned how I wanted it to. And if we do, we're going to rob ourselves of life. If we miss things that God calls us to. That's not saying live foolishly. That's not saying, but it's, if I'm so consumed with my city and my kingdom, my eyes aren't going to be on the city that Abraham was looking to. Right? We can do this. We can so easily fall into the trap of trying to hold on to our world and our life that we are creating for ourselves, and God is offering us something better. It's a citizenship not of this world, but of the kingdom of God, and it's far, far better. And when you surrender, when you give the entirety of your life, all that you are, all that you have, and say, God, it's all yours. This is for your kingdom and your glory, your renown. Use me. That's life, according to Jesus. And so I'll say it once more as we conclude. Trust, obey, give your life away. Let me pray.